Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to the February public board meeting. We have no apologies from the board, but our normal secretary, Martin, is not well, so he's not here. Martin, if you've got nothing better to do on your sickbed than be watching this, hope you get better. And Pauline has very kindly stepped into the breach to take the minutes. Particular welcome to Gabriella Ashton, who is our Gender Equality Network Chair, and Gabby, you're very welcome. Feel free to speak if you wish to as we go through things. Any declarations of interest from anybody? Very good. That takes us on to the minutes of our January meeting. Are they a true and accurate record of everything we discussed? Nods around the table, so we'll take that as approved. I think if you go to the action log, everything is sort of where it should be in terms of things will be coming back when they're supposed to, or we've already delivered them. So I think we're there on the action log. Is there anything arising anybody wants to raise that's not otherwise there? Perfect. Excuse me. I'm losing my voice. You'll be pleased to know I might have lost it by the end of the meeting. In that case, we'll move even quicker. So that takes us to the executive team's report. Ian.
Thanks, Peter. I think the first thing I want to say is to note our response to the coronavirus, or the COVID-19 as it's now called. I just want to give assurance to the board that we are working closely with colleagues in Public Health England and with NHS England in particular, where our team are joining the daily Silver Command calls in order to make sure that we're constantly updated. We're approaching this work from two dimensions. One is what our contribution to the broader system is. And so I've written to Sir Simon Stevens, the Chief Executive of NHS England, and to Duncan Selby, the Chief Executive of Public Health England, and offered practical support from CQC colleagues. That may be things like the use of our contact centre. It may be the release of doctors and nurses that we employ. It may be also the release of senior colleagues to help man command centres and so forth. So I've made a very broad offer of help, and we are continuing that conversation as to how that would be used. We're also doing work internally around how we as an enterprise respond to COVID-19. So what happens if the epidemic or pandemic really takes hold? What does that mean in terms of significant numbers of our people can't come into office locations? What does that mean in terms of significant number of people not able to go in and inspect and so forth? And what does that mean for us? So there will inevitably be some very practical considerations there around making sure that in the first instance our people are protected. That's got to be our first priority. And then the second priority is what does that mean in terms of our obligations and our policy choices that we might make around what we do and indeed don't inspect. So lots of work going on in the background, but I just thought it was worth just putting on the record for all board members that we're working hard both internally and externally on COVID-19. And I've asked Rosie to be our lead executive team member on COVID-19. And my expectation is as the virus ramps up over the next few days, then preparations will ramp up, and obviously we'll let you know separately if we're doing something fundamentally different. That's all I wanted to say initially, Peter, and I want to hand over to Kate just to talk about an upcoming publication.
And just before that, can I just make clear for the record that I'm recovering from a cold, not from not from COVID-19. Right, Kate. Kate.
Thank you, Peter. So I just want to flag to the board a publication that's going live tomorrow called Promoting Sexual Safety Through Empowerment. We've talked about it a couple of times here at the board. It's a piece of work that we've done very closely with families who have experienced loved ones who have been sexually assaulted or sexually abused within care settings, an extensive piece of work with providers to pull together a report that talks about the importance of having open cultures to enable people to have conversations around sex, sexuality and relationships. So that's going live tomorrow.
Great, good, thank you, Kate. Where are we going next?
Moving on to Ted.
Ted.
Thank Thank you, Peter. There's some issues in the written report there that I'll highlight one or two of, but we can discuss any you want to raise. Just before I went away on my leave recently, we put out a blog on winter pressures. And this was an important statement of our position. It was reiterating a lot of what we said in State of Care, but essentially, I suppose it reflects our frustration that while the system is working very hard to cope with the current winter pressures, year on year we are seeing those pressures get worse. And what we really need to see is some work done at a system level to make sure that by next winter the pressures are, if you like, reduced, if not completely abolished. Because I think there's a real concern at the moment that we are seeing this as an increasing trend where pressures every year on emergency departments increase, and that reflects the pressures within the emergency care system. And the emergency department, as we've discussed before around this table, is very much a weather vane of what's going on in the whole system. And this is where the symptoms of the system problems and the capacity issues in the system are manifest. So it is very important that we take a system-wide approach to this, and the blog was very much calling on systems to work together to plan for next winter, rather than just see this issue about just managing this winter. During this winter, we have been out doing routine focused inspections of emergency departments, as we have done in previous winters. We've now completed quite a few of those, and we are seeing the same kind of problems we've seen in previous years. Everywhere we go is working under enormous pressure. We're seeing real concerns about some of the care in corridors or other unsatisfactory places in many departments, and we can only deal with that going forward if we deal with some of these system pressures that are underlying it and driving it, and that's why I'm so keen to see this going forward. We've also highlighted there in the report the work we're doing in terms of inpatient mental health facilities. We've published another report today on child and adolescent mental health services in Northampton, which was very unsatisfactory. It is really quite a disturbing report to read, and we have been working with the provider to make sure that action is taken to deal with that. You'll see that we've rated 14 mental health hospitals for learning disability and autism as inadequate since May of last year. That work continues, and as the board knows, we are preparing the final stages of our report onto Restraint, Segregation and Seclusion, and we'll be publishing that in the spring. A very important document talking about the care of this group of patients who really have been let down by the system for so long. In terms of follow-up to inspecting closed environments, we received a report from David Noble here last month, and the board will be getting updates on progress in implementing those recommendations. And I'm looking forward to receiving the report from Glenys Murphy onto the wider regulatory issues that were revealed by the events in Walton Hall, and I hope that will be coming to the board in the next few months.
Ted, I just commend you on the blog. It was a very good read, and I mean, it was short, but absolutely made the points that needed to be made.
I think blogs are meant to be short, so
I stand corrected. But it was meant as a compliment anyway. Right, so Mark, I think we come to you next.
Thank you. Just a couple of technology improvements that I wanted to bring to the board's attention. We've been working really closely with Microsoft to take advantage of the new accessibility tools that we now have available to us within the Office 365 suite of tools. And in fact, we had a whole day session with Microsoft where we took our Disability Equality Network to join them to understand about what technology we can bring to the organisation and what's coming in the future. One of the biggest things that we've done that's had an impact with colleagues is the deployment of the live captions technology within Microsoft Teams, which means that for video conferences, those colleagues with hearing impairments can see a live subtitling of the conversation that's going on. And in particular, one of our colleagues, Paul Kirby, who's the head of our Disability Equality Network and who is very seriously hearing impaired, has talked about his experience of using this, which is pretty life-changing. And what you don't appreciate is when you're trying to follow a meeting with lots of different people talking, and you're trying to lip read individuals, it has a huge impact on your your energy and your ability to follow that meeting. And with the live captions facility, he's described this as really game changing for him, because it really allows him to follow meetings very easily and to concentrate on the meeting content. Other improvements that we've released include those to support colleagues with neurodiversity and visual impairments as well, with functionality like immersive reader and dictation facilities within documents. And one other improvement that we've completed recently is with the analytics software that we use to support our colleagues in inspection, in intelligence, and in the NCSC for driving reporting and insights into providers. Two really significant improvements there. One has been the stability. With our previous system, the system was often unavailable in the morning because the overnight processing of the data took such a long time. We now have that consistently down to finish well ahead of the start of the business day, which has had a big improvement for colleagues. But the performance improvements that colleagues have been absolutely transformational. So more than tenfold increase in the speed of the reports means that colleagues really have the access to the data that they need.
So, Mark, the subtitles, I mean, it works on Teams. That's really good. But it just occurred to me as you were talking. I mean, Paul's been here at the board before, complete with two interpreters, because it's actually very tiring for the interpreters as well. So this is altogether quite. Does Microsoft also have a capacity that through mobile phone and maybe through Teams or not, the subtitles from people in the room can appear? So would Paul be able to get that on a phone?
Yes, without going into
Yeah.
there are several different options available to you. Sorry, thank you. There are several different options available to you. The two that immediately, one of the things that you can do is that you can actually join a Teams meeting on your own, and that you can listen to the conversation that's going on in the room and provide a live captions service to you right now if I wanted to. The other newly available feature is PowerPoint. So if you are presenting a PowerPoint and use the PowerPoint online feature, it has the ability for you to present live captions at the bottom of a PowerPoint feed as well. So yes, is the short answer. Yeah.
Fabulous. Sorry, Liz.
I just wanted to commend this work on accessibility, really, because and I think it's very timely in the sense that the Workplace Disability Equality Standard is now live in the health sector. And so for us to be kind of taking a leading role in terms of how digital technology can work to practically improve accessibility for our colleagues just seems a really positive development. So thank you.
Robert?
It was actually about the pandemic, epidemic, whatever, and it was. I understand from what you say that we're working well with other bodies about contingency plans, both externally and internally. Do we, as a regulator, have any responsibilities with regard to the oversight of how the response to people who are ill with this are being looked after? I mean, I ask that simply because this is obviously something which has public health elements, civic elements, as well as health and social care elements. And I just wondered whether, and I absolutely understand that we don't want inspectors getting in the way of looking after people, but simply in terms of our regulatory responsibilities, could you help me as to whether we actually have any in relation to what potentially is an emergency situation?
I think my starting position would be we have obligations around human rights, making sure people's human rights are properly respected, as well as safety within medical environments. I will defer to my legal colleagues as to whether we have any specific additional powers. But again, when I was talking about our external position, I think we need to consider our, if you like, our routine inspection schedule, which of course we want to make sure doesn't interfere with normal things, with normal healthcare. However, I think we also need to recognise that there will be our natural work or our normal work to look at safety and quality will continue, including the human rights component of that. If I can just defer to Rebecca and see if there's any specific powers which.
Yeah, no, I agree with Ian. So we have a responsibility to regulate, as we do now, where people are in a medical facility or a care facility, but our work with system partners in terms of contingency planning and the activity to get ready, we're there in a partner role, not an oversight role.
Did you want to come back, Robert?
No, what had occurred to me was that it perhaps shows it obviously is a very important area and we treat it as such, but that it points up the fact that we are a regulator of providers rather than systems, and at the end of the day, we very much hope nothing goes wrong systemically with regard to this. It looks as though preparations are being made, but whether there ought to be a regulatory component to it and what our involvement in that, obviously I'm not talking about what could be, but what actually is now.
One of the questions that we looked at when the first group of people came back and stayed in the nurses' accommodation in Arrow Park Hospital on the Wirral was, was there a requirement to register that accommodation as a separate medical facility? And we looked at that from a legal point of view, decided no, there was not. But that becomes an ongoing question around whether those individuals, particularly as people start being put up in hotels, for example, is that a medical facility or is that a group of people who are being quarantined and then looked after by the local primary care system, which is in fact what happened in a number of cases. So I think it feels to me that there's an ongoing question around registration of facilities, particularly facilities which would not normally be used. So at the moment, I'm not aware of people being quarantined, for example, on a military base. And again, what would be the registration requirements in that context? So I think for me, it feels like a very much an ongoing situation. But in terms of where we sit at the moment, we're confident that the right registrations are in place. That gives us our normal suite of enforcement and oversight powers, which we will discharge as if that was business as usual. But I think we're very much open to the fact that things may change over the course of time.
Thank you.
So, Malta, I think we come to you, please.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Over the last few months, I've been highlighting the work that CQC has been doing and how we regulate new technologies in services, and this year this is culminating in the outputs of 3 regulatory sandboxes, which are spaces where we've been working with developers of technologies, providers, people who use services, and other stakeholders to really understand the impact of those new technologies, what good looks like in their deployment for people using services, and what the potential regulatory gaps might be. And the report from that first regulatory sandbox into digital triage was published in late January and is now available, as you can see in the report. The second sandbox report will be published later in March, which is on machine learning in diagnostics, and the third sandbox will report later in the year because it's looking at registration issues for new models of care at home emerging for that. And then I'm happy to report that there have been no significant risks or incidents in terms of information security or cyber security, and also for the board to be aware that from next month onward, Mark Sutton, our Chief Digital Officer, is going to take over from me as Senior Information Risk Officer.
Well done, Mark. Any questions? John?
Firstly, Malta, thank you very much and for the work on this. This is a really important area and a growing area. So I wonder if you could give me a sense of going forward, what the planned activity is, and also in terms of intelligence that enables us to be look forward to being intelligence driven in terms of our future strategy.
You mean on technology, the work with technology specifically? Yeah. So in terms of how we're taking this work forward, there's more to come. We've also been doing work on what good looks like for organizations to encourage innovation, new technologies, or to adopt known solutions. And I think we're planning to publish this during March. And that's work we've been doing collaboratively with lots of other organizations, including NHSX, the Accelerated Access Collaboratives, local government stakeholders, etc. Because we felt there was a strong need to have a common view on what good looks like, which at the moment doesn't really exist and that we can all work from. And CQC specifically will take those principles and work them into our assessment framework, particularly around well-led. So that's still part of the work that's ongoing. In terms of next year, there's a two-pronged approach. On the one hand, we're having lots of conversation with some of our stakeholders, particularly NHSX, who've set up the new artificial intelligence lab with a lot of potential funding behind it, because we would like to see and have proposed that we take forward some of the sandboxing work and learning from that into an environment where we do that together with other organizations. We've already involved other organizations like MHRA and NHSX into this work, but there is something about more formally setting some of these sandboxes up between, for example, MHRA and CQC for that. So we're looking what opportunities there are for joint working, but also for funding. Alongside that, we're continuing the work that CQC is doing. Specifically, on the one hand, we've set up a quality improvement project as part of the sort of first wave of gold projects that's looking specifically at how we can build both the awareness of our inspection colleagues of new technologies, but also bring insights that they see and observe from services back to the organization and respond to that, because it might actually tell us that something happens quite early that we could respond to, or that sort of themes emerging on risks or issues that we hadn't picked up so far. And alongside that, we are continuing the work of collecting examples of where new technologies have contributed to improvements in care. We've always said that is the big potential of new technologies, to see those improvements. We've also said that they need to be safe and well managed, which is why we're doing the sandboxing. But I think we have an opportunity and an obligation to continue to highlight that, to share good practice. And again, we're working quite closely there with NHSX about what good looks like and how we can share that and give an example to other services or to services about what they could do to do improvement, not just in terms of high whizzy tech, but actually sometimes quite simple solutions that can make a huge difference.
Right, are we happy to move on? Great, so that does move us on then, I think, Kirsty, to the performance. And okay, go Chris.
Hi there. So I'll introduce. I'll work us through the slide pack and hand over at the right opportunity. If anyone's got any questions, to just shout as we go through. So this is the quarterly performance up to the end of December. So the first area to focus on is registration, which has so performance, as we've kind of mentioned previously, is below target in all four KPI areas. There's a recovery phase underway, but Kirsty, I think you wanted to add a bit more on the work that's been.
I do, thank you. So we've been having a concerted effort around our registration operations programme to look at performance. It wasn't good enough, and we've been taking a fairly different view in terms of how we're going to sort this out. So we've put in a recovery plan to look at how we deliver that operation. The first thing we've been doing is trying to understand the volumes, the risk, the activity, the time it takes, and really get a good baseline of activity. We get over 12,000 applications come in per week, and when we started the recovery plan, we had some that were in the system that were over 300 days old. We want to try and process most applications within 50 days is our KPI. What we've been doing since November, which is when we started this piece of work, is to break it down. So we've been focusing very much on getting the backlog cleared. We've now cleared 85% of those oldest applications and have been cleared. What we've done is change the way in which we're working. We've split the registration process into national teams. We've looked at splitting out the more complex processes and the more simple processes. The more simple processes we've been pushing through our National Customer Service Centre to try and to get those done sort of like with our admin support. Those have been working really impressively, and we've started to really improve the time in which we can get those through. And then we've been pushing the more complex applications through to our inspectors to deal with. That is starting to make some really good progress in terms of improvement of time taken, and I think we will start to see those green shoots of recovery coming through over the coming months. What we're also doing is putting in place some new KPIs to really start to focus on the performance that we need to see as we move forwards, and those will be developed and in place for April.
Thanks. I think just to add to that, certainly when I joined the registration improvement team, one of the conversations that we got into was, although some of our registration applications were quite old, I think one of the things we had been doing has been allowing people to put registration applications in that were incomplete. And so one of the reasons for some of the aged applications was about incomplete paperwork and then having to chase providers, because in some cases people put applications in too early and they weren't ready themselves to actually open the facility. So to some extent the 300 days sounds like a long time, but I do think there's an important point to make around the different types of application, which I think is a really important point. And I think part of this is about us having a real discipline around what we will accept as an application before the clock starts ticking, and that's a really important component of this work.
I should have mentioned that we have been doing some work to not put applications into the system now, so until they are complete. So we've been working with providers when they've made an application and it's been incomplete. What we had done in the past was start to process that, as you say, and then we were backwards and forwards trying to get the information. What we're doing now is holding that application at the start. We're working with providers to get a complete pack of data before we move it through the system, and when we're moving it through, we're getting it through well within the KPI. So that sort of improvement process is sort of part of the type of work that we're doing as we move forward in this space.
Paul, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I was just trying to make sure I understood exactly what's happening here, because I guess when you clear backlogs, if you concentrate on clearing the backlog, you potentially set up a new backlog in the current ones being delayed. Did I understand that what you're saying is that while that might be happening a little bit at the moment, you'll get that back up and cleared by this couple of months, essentially?
So what we've done is we've managed to use some of our underspend within RCCO to augment our inspection resource within registration on a temporary basis to address that backlog, to get that down and also stop the backlog reoccurring. So we are actually starting to move the whole process forwards in an efficient way and keep that backlog at the minimal levels so it doesn't happen.
Okay, Chris.
Okay, so over to inspections in terms of our return to rate. And the first thing to flag here is I think anyone who's accessed our published slides, the slide is wrong. It's incorrect. It's showing a worse position than reality. So we'll get that rectified. The executive team members have got the correct version. The headlines really is PMS and hospitals continue to deliver on their commitments, over 90% within KPI. ASC slightly under, but the focus is on delivering inadequate and require improvement. And the correct graph would illustrate that. So any questions to take on?
Rosie?
I know at the last couple of board meetings this has been raised in terms of the PMS return to inadequates, and I just wanted to give the board assurance that in December we didn't go to one inadequate practice, and that was due to a bereavement in the practice, and in January we haven't attended one practice, which was an independent health provider, which was actually, the provider was on holiday, and so we rescheduled. So I just wanted to give the board assurance following the last couple of months' questions that we're absolutely monitoring this very closely.
Thank you, Rosie. I think the concern has always been to be sure that we haven't lost sight of them. So if there are good reasons, I mean, clearly those two you've not lost sight of because you know exactly why you didn't do that. So I'm personally very reassured by that. Thank you. Right. Onwards.
Just to say that on PMS as well, the correct graph would show an improving trend over time as well. So the next thing to pull out is urgent actions, which is slide 8 in the pack. We responded to 75% of urgent actions within 3 days against a target of 70%. So we're achieving well on that. Safeguarding, slide 10 again. If anyone has any questions, I'll pause. Safeguarding alert, slide 10. So safeguarding alerts themselves stood at 97% against a target of 95, so above target. And concerns requiring mandatory action within 5 days. Year-to-date performance is now at 92% against a target of 95. And there's a real kind of good news story here in that in around August, September time, we stood up a workshop to address this problem and the underperformance. And since that point, we've seen a real improvement in trajectory to hit 98% in December. So it's a real kind of a marker of where a change has led to improvement.
Kate.
Could I just chip in there, Chris, and correct me if I'm wrong. So we've put a lot of focus on this area, and throughout we were assured by our teams that action absolutely was being taken in a timely way, but for some reason our systems weren't reflecting it. And there was a very simple solution around making sure that a mandatory box was filled out in our systems before people could progress to confirm that action had been taken. So this isn't that a whole load of different activities going on now than it was in the summer. It's just that our systems now reflect the work that we have actually done.
So, just in a sense, going back to what I was saying to Rosie, I mean, my concern here is not just that we're hitting the target, but that those where we miss the target, we aren't sort of doing nothing and losing sight of it. I mean, it may be a good reason or not good reason for missing it, but if it's like it's a day, that's one thing. If it's a month, that's something completely different. And not necessarily for answer now, but I would like to find a way where we can pick up what happened to those that are behind target, so we just know that nothing is getting lost between the cracks. I'll take silence as agreement with me. That's great. Good. Chris, onwards. Thank you.
So the next area to look at is our report writing. So this is slides 12, 13, 14, I believe. The headlines is overall 89% of reports published within KPI against 90% target, so virtually there. ASC are on target 90%, PMS above target at 94%, and hospitals below at 54%. There's a significant amount of work happening in the hospitals area with a range of QI programs underway. So yeah, happy to.
Well, we had a very helpful discussion at the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee yesterday evening, so discussing the work underway to try and improve the turnover of reports. I think the realisation we have is that we need to actively manage the situation better, and we're doing that. But underlying it, the whole process of producing reports is too complex and needs to be simplified. And that's particularly around the quality assurance side of the process, which is the most time consuming. And the board will remember that in the Noble report that we had last month, one of the recommendations was we should review the quality assurance process. But what we're doing is some quality improvement work around the whole end-to-end process of producing reports, and that we hope will deliver real benefits, both in terms of the workload for inspectors, which is very important, but also the timeliness of the publication of reports.
Good, thank you. Gosh, the board's very quiet today. Chris.
So on our money, we are currently underspent by £1 million at the end of December, with a forecast of 1.5 million for the end of the year. On the capital side, we're projecting a 1.9 million underspend. We are anticipating there might be a movement between revenue and capital as we evaluate some of the projects that are underway at the minute, which may lead to some capitalisation. So those variances may change when reported next time, but overall a good position on our money.
Right. Anybody want to ask any questions or make any comments on any of that? Yeah, Robert.
There was a question I had on enforcement, actually, which I know I'm very slow to react, but
Go for it.
Which was where are we? Okay, we're way back. Slide 8, thank you, where we measure, sorry, that's not the one I meant, it's the outcomes slide, the next one, where we measure success. And we count numbers, which is a good thing to do, I understand that, because obviously if we aren't succeeding, then there are questions to be asked. But I just wonder whether this may be difficult, but is there a measure at all of the gravity of the individual cases? By which I mean there will be some enforcement actions which are potentially technical. I mean, nothing is not important, but more technical than others, whereas others could be, frankly, a Walton Hall. And obviously, success in relation to something like that, it may be just one case, but it's much more significant than the total number. Now, how you capture that in a chart, I'm not entirely sure, but I just wondered whether we have some way of thinking about that. It's the usual thing about qualitative data as against quantitative data, but it's an area where lots and lots of enforcement actions about nothing very much is probably not a sign of success, whereas real success over some really important things is.
I mean, Rebecca, whether there's a way of sort of putting it on a chart or not, I don't know, but I suspect you've got a pretty good feel for how this is going, and if you can put Robert's mind at rest.
I had a conversation with Steph, who's been looking at these success measures and working to see if we can make them more meaningful in the future, because it's very crude at the moment and doesn't actually tell you, as you've said, did we do the right thing? Was it a good use of our resources? So I think we could do some quite interesting stuff in the future around, for example, trying to track cases and having a look at the sort of attrition rate, if you like, as to what happens. I don't know that you could ever get it on a kind of little bar chart like this, but I think it would be possible to do something a bit more qualitative, almost on a sort of sampling basis, that would be quite interesting, but not on a bar chart.
I think it's a similar issue to registration, actually, where not all registrations were created equal, and so a relatively small piece of registration activity, say a change of a GP partner name, is quite different to the registration of a new hospital, and I think that probably it's a similar thing. So I suspect once we get to grips with the new registration numbers, we might be able to kind of so-called T-shirt size some of these prosecutions and see where that lands, which may deliver some variant of that, plus what Rebecca said. I think between the two probably gets us there. Jora?
I was going to pick up on a separate point. I wasn't sure if Chris was coming into the same point.
Just before we lose Robert's point, I mean, I can't think, I may be wrong, but I can't think of some really significant enforcement action that we wanted to take that we were unsuccessful over, where we've all been wringing our hands. So I mean, yeah, is that right?
No, I agree. I think what would be interesting would be just to, review some cases, look at the intervention that we took, and think about the impact and whether we did the right thing at the right time. So it's more about kind of efficiency and where we're stepping in and not.
So, Ted, are you on this point?
Well, I just support what Robert's saying. You can't really represent the success in totality in graphical and numeric terms. I think it would be welcome to do exactly what Rebecca has just suggested, is to actually look at some case examples and see, what enforcement action we took and what was the effect of that, and was it successful in terms of the impact on people using services and people affected by it. But that needs more detailed work. It's not something you can just present in a performance study, but I think it'd be very useful to do.
So Chris and Liz, you're both on this point, are you, before I go to Jora? Yep, Chris.
Just one thing to say that might be stating the obvious. Not successful might mean the organisation is closed. So if the enforcement action was significant, and they didn't respond well to that enforcement action, we might take other action which might cause that organisation to close. So just to be really clear, that even the ones where the small number, which is described here as not successful, the key thing is that people would still have been protected. There'll just be a different type of enforcement to cause them to be protected.
That's a really good point, thank you. Listen then, Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to let the board know that Regulatory Governance Committee in March is going to take a bit of a deep dive look at enforcement, including the criteria for taking enforcement action and how we understand impact. So maybe we can bring some learning back.
Paul, you're on this as well, are you?
On this subject?
On the subject?
Yes,
please.
So what I was going to say is that I think there's a different question which could be asked, which is where are we not able to take enforcement action where we might feel that we ought to be able to take enforcement action? So it's where we're taking enforcement action, the result looks good, but where are there things where we really would like to have been able to take enforcement action, but we weren't able to for what, usually because we haven't got the powers to do so or something like that. And that's possibly a question, it's a different question, but I think it's one which is worth considering.
It's a very good question.
Yes, I can't think of a case where we've wanted to take enforcement action and couldn't. I think where we do get frustrated is sometimes over the time it takes, for example. So the amount of time it might take to move from trying to drive improvement to issuing a notice of proposal to cancel, to going through the reps process, to cancellation, to tribunal. You know, people could be living in substandard care for quite a long time before we get to that outcome. So I think it's more about the time that it can take to go down a particular track and looking at perhaps whether there are other routes that we could have taken.
Good, thank you. Jora, I think we've finally exhausted that, so we'll come to whatever you were going to raise. Thank you.
Sounds it was a question for Ted and maybe Mark. Just picking up on the timeliness of report publication for hospitals. Have we looked at any possibilities of technologies from either the intelligence team or NHSX that could help with the quality assurance side of things? That could possibly speed up the review process.
I'll hand to Mark in a moment, but I think we do need to look at the way we produce reports and publish reports and look at doing it in a more modern fashion using the appropriate technology, as Jura, so that's correct. In terms of quality assurance, not as yet, but our review of quality assurance will need to take into account all opportunities. So we'll certainly look at that as part of our review of quality assurance, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if we look at, obviously this is a sort of a lean, streamlining business process review process across all the different components, and I think if you look at each of those components, technology has something to offer in terms of reducing the amount of administration in each step. So I think yes across each of those areas, but not yes on the quality piece.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah. So just the final parts of the deck on our people metrics. Turnover was within target, 11.21%. Sickness remains low at 3.77. So anyone, any questions on the people slides?
Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, no, it's very good, Kirsty, that we've had the turnover with less than 2 years service on this month. Is something that we asked for, and so thanks for delivering that. I just wonder whether it would be possible, I think we said we would do this every quarter. We just wondered whether we could actually just have a chart showing that turnover, showing the spikes through that 12-month period. It might just be interesting. It's not quite as high as I thought it might be, but clearly there's an opportunity there through good onboarding, budding systems, clearer job specs, line management accountability, development opportunities to go after that target to try to reduce it. But I'm glad we've got that piece of information, and thanks for delivering it.
Thanks, Mark. As part of the people plan, which we're coming to talk about shortly, there is a whole piece of work we're doing around our metrics and on our people, and we will be able to report those on a more regular basis going forwards as part of our performance suite.
Anything else from anybody on the performance report? Okay, so Kirsty, it's back to you, I think. Give you.
So in terms of the change update for this quarter, I'm just going to talk through some of our programs. I'm going to hand over to Kate to talk about the improving regulation today, and then I'll hand on to Mark to talk about the digital work. In terms of the portfolio as a whole, I think we're making some good progress on the portfolio. The overall health of the portfolio is on an upwards trend, which is good. Some of the highlights, our transformation vision and the supporting materials have all been signed off, and we will be launching those to the organisation and wider in April, which is it's been a big piece of work to do, and I'm really excited to see that land. And we've also done some really good progress along the people front. In terms of some of the individual projects, we are making some good progress on our programme called Transforming Our Organisation. This is a programme of work to build our new target operating model for CQC. I think the way we've been describing this is it's supporting the implementation plan for our new strategy going forwards, but it's more than that. It's also about how we can transition from where we currently are now to the future, and what we need to do to ensure that we can continue to regulate effectively now, but also in the future. So there's some good work we've been doing there around onboarding our staff, onboarding our colleagues, and bringing in some professional support, and also starting to think about the scope of that programme and some of the design principles that we want to work there. Our registration transformation programme is one of our key strategic programmes. We have made some really good progress over the last couple of months, or the last quarter in this. We have now built our new digital end-to-end service for domiciliary care and new registered managers. That has been now built, and we're now in testing of that. That's quite a landmark moment for us to have actually built that whole new service from scratch. That is in testing, and we're hoping to go live with that into public beta in the next couple of months. As part of that work, the registration transformation work, we've been building this using our service design principles, but we've also had quite a lot of work around our improvements in terms of looking at how we can improve the systems and processes that support registration. And we've had some really good progress in that area. In particular, just to highlight some of the work around cancelling registered applications, that improvement work has now enabled us to reduce that from an average of 30 days down to 10, and adding and removing partners on our registration, we've been able to reduce that from an average of 24 days down to 13 using really good quality improvement techniques. The work on our quality improvement continues to build. We have now completed our gold programme. We have our initial gold programme, I should say. We've had 15 colleagues working over on a three blocks of a week-long programme to become skilled in quality improvement. They have now completed that work and have been returned back to the business to take forward some of our key corporate initiatives around quality improvement. We're also we're also recruiting for our silver colleagues. So this is the next layer down in our quality improvement plan. We are currently out to expressions of interest for that, and we have over 300 expressions of interest received so far. So there's a real positive approach and real enthusiasm in the organisation to take forward this training. Some of the work we're looking at around gold projects includes things like looking at our report timeliness and working to support particularly the hospitals directorate in that area, looking at our finances and billing processes and innovation champions and how we can improve our knowledge across the organisation. One other thing to note around some of our projects is our Give Feedback on Care service. So this is our new digital service to enable people to provide feedback to us, good or bad, about the care that they've received. This is a new digital service that went live into public beta or public service at the end of January. it's working well. We've made 2 upgrades to that service already, and we've received over 10,000 submissions since it went live on the 13th of January. So it's a really, really positive step, and it's really enabling people to tell us about their care. And because it's coming in a digital format, it is helping us to move that information around the organisation to do the best that we need to do with it. In terms of people plan, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about people plan this quarter because we've got a lot of the rest of the agenda talking about people, but just to say that we've been focusing on building a holistic approach to making CQC a great place to work with our people. The core focus there is on enhancing our experience for all our employees and reflecting on some of the insights that we've had from and about our colleagues to really focus that piece of work. Some of the other bits of work we've been doing have been things around building our success profiles. So this is a piece of work where we are involving all our staff in workshops from across the various grades to help define the behaviours for success at each level and role in the organisation. We've had really good take-up of that and lots of engagement from colleagues at all levels of the organisation to really help us move that one forwards. I won't talk any more about people because we're going to pick that up in a minute. But so in conclusion, so what are we doing over the next few months? We really want to continue to work on launching our transformation brand and really getting those messages out across the organisation so people really understand the impact that transformation will have on improving their day-to-day experience of working at CQC. We are also about to communicate our portfolio priorities for next year and explain why projects are in and what we've done about the projects that we haven't been able to take forward in terms of putting things onto a backlog. We are launching our diversity and inclusion strategy in March and are also going to look to mobilise our people plan during April, the work on our people plan to programmatise that to enable us to take forward those initiatives that we're going to talk about shortly. I'll hand over to Kate now to talk about improving regulation today.
Thank you, Kirsty. So improving regulation today are currently focusing on 3 main priorities. The first one is implementation around liberty protection safeguards. So there is an ongoing conversation with the department about go live and what the model should look like. We have been busily working out how we will respond to the changes and what that would look like for us. So that's a piece of work that is ongoing and is requiring quite a lot of effort to make sure that we're really clear that we can respond to that when it comes into force. The second priority is our plans to go out to make amendments to our current assessment framework this spring. So we are going to be working with NHSI and NHSE to make some proposed changes around our well-led component of our key lines of inquiry and a number of other kind of smaller changes in advance of the big consultation we will be having in autumn about what our new strategy should look like. So some tweaks while we go forward with our kind of big plan and our strategy. And then the final priority is, as we discussed at the last board, the recommendations from David Noble and the wider work that's going on around closed environments is going to be pulled together and overseen by improving regulation today. So at the moment we're scoping exactly what should be in that piece of work and it covers a wealth of things, including things such as future role around CCTV surveillance and how it shouldn't be used, as well as a collection of other things that we committed to last time coming back and updating this board on the progress on that piece of work in particular. So those are the 3 priorities under improving regulation today.
Any questions? John?
Well, not a question, but just a comment. I don't think people should underestimate the scale of what's being tackled here and how from a low base there have been significant movements forward, and that's not always felt by people, but nonetheless it's laying the foundations for substantive change, and this is really tricky stuff, as big as any I've witnessed, and so I do congratulate the team for getting a rigour and a grip, but also being agile enough to solve the issues when things hit a sticky patch.
I totally echo that. Thank you. Anybody want to raise anything? Oh. Yeah, Mark.
Well, no, just coming on to the
sorry.
the technology updates. But I'll hold off.
Before we do that, was it on what we've covered so far, Jora?
Just one, but I've seen the give feedback, and I think it's really good. Maybe one of the things we could consider is the sort of search engine optimization. I was just doing a Google search for it. I didn't find it. So maybe we want to just add that in as a suggestion.
No, that's right. As Kirsty mentioned, there's two changes, small improvements that we've made to it. And we've got a conversation with colleagues at DHC about those changes. And then in the next financial year, we've got some SEO support for it once those changes are embedded.
That's quite a good segue, Mark, to you anyway, so go for it.
Fantastic. So just a brief update from me on our three main digital initiatives. So Kirsty referenced our Digital Foundations programme. We've made really significant progress in the last quarter in overhauling our digital infrastructure. In that period, we've completed our Office 365 and SharePoint rollout across the whole organisation, and that includes secure mobile access to that Office 365 suite. And we're now progressing really well in implementing our new supplier services for service desk, end user computing and security operations. And we're already starting to see the results of this work with colleagues sort of recognising that this is really helping them to give them the tools that they need to do the job already, although there's still a way to go. The regulatory platform is a new programme which is intended to replace our legacy CRM systems and other systems with a modern applications that will provide a flexible operational platform. The purpose of this is to simplify our regulatory processes and significantly reduce the burden of administration on inspectors, and that programme is going well. It's in its discovery and design phase at the moment, with a final business case due to be coming back to the board for approval in the next couple of months. And then finally, on intelligence-driven enablers, we're in the process of designing that new data architecture and the tools to provide that infrastructure at the moment to give us the data quality that we really need to be intelligence-driven in the future. We have an expert systems project which is completed that allows us to present relevant data insights to our inspectors. And again, the purpose of this is around providing inspectors with the intelligence tools that really enable them to support our purpose of keeping people safe.
I mean, I recognise my needs are much less than many of our colleagues in terms of technology, but just my own personal experience of 365 and everything that's come with it and the mobile technology just been superb. And I've also had some very positive anecdotal feedback from people I just happened to talk to in the organisation. So I really congratulate you and your team on what's been done. Long may it continue. There's more to do, but it's great. Very good. Anybody want to add anything or ask anything, or are we happy to move on? Gosh. Right. So, people. So, Jill is not. Oh, Jill is there. Oh, right. Jill's not there. Right, you've got a filibuster for a few minutes then, Kirsty. It's not often we're running ahead of time. That's clearly what has completely thrown the entire system.
So I think before Jill comes down, I think we've been doing quite a lot of work in our people space since Jill started back in the summer. We had quite a lot of people initiatives that were sort of were happening, but what we've done is now brought them together into an overarching holistic people plan to look at how we take forward all the work we want to do around around our people in terms of building capability, improving, making CQC a great place to work every day, our metrics and our Dni strategies and all those sort of things. So we've brought this together into a big piece of work, which we are going to put into a programme with clear deliverables. What we wanted to do today is talk you through the people plan element, which I will let Jill do when she comes, because I don't want to steal her thunder. So we want to talk about that. We want to talk about the work that we're doing around our diversity and inclusion strategy, and we have our draft diversity and inclusion strategy for you today. And then we also want to talk about our people survey results and what we're doing in that space.
So we like to deliver ahead of expectations, Jill.
And I'll hand over to Jill now.
You gave Kirsty a nasty couple of minutes, but that's we survived that. So welcome and welcome. It's good to see you and everybody else who will introduce us, or you'll introduce when we get there. But Jill, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good still morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here to share with you 3 papers that we've pulled together for you, all very interlinked and related. So I thought it would be sensible if I just sort of talk to each of the papers together in a group, and then we can pause and open up for some questions and reflections. So if everyone's happy with that, I'll catch my breath from running down the stairs. So We've firstly shared with you the sort of the covering paper for the People Survey from the survey that was live in the autumn. The feedback that we've got from the survey, I have to say, is probably no huge surprise. We've done a pulse survey earlier in the summer, and I think the questions that we asked in that pulse survey remained pretty constant in the context of the wider full survey that we undertook in the autumn time. It does, however, give us some really valuable data and insight into the experience of our colleagues working in CQC at the moment. I think it's worth acknowledging that there are some exceptionally high positive scores within this survey and this data set, especially in relation to the connection that our colleagues feel to our purpose as an organisation, and also to the positive impact that we have for people's lives. And whilst it might be attractive to sort of move on to the things we need to really focus on and pay attention to, I think holding that as an incredibly positive and strong place to be as an organisation is really important. Across the wider central government agenda, and within the private sector, organisations would give their right arm to have that sense of purpose and that strength of connection to the organisation. So we really mustn't lose sight of how important that is and how strongly it's felt. The relationship and support from local line managers and teams remains really positive, and that in itself, I think, is powerful given the dispersed nature of our workforce. So we have people who work and are home-based, and therefore they are still getting a strong relationship with their local line manager and also with their team, and that again is a very powerful foundation on which we need to sort of continue to build. And I think the other highlight to draw to attention is where we have invested heavily in technology and technological improvements, we have seen significant shifts in positive scores. So 16-70% score increase is actually incredibly high. Statistically, it's high. Analysts will tell you this. But that is a big leap in the course of a 12-month period. So they're the kind of things I think we need to bank and recognise as really strong, while we're still moving on and paying attention to the things that we've heard and noticed that therefore are worthy of our ongoing attention and the focus of our energy going forward. So I think for me there's kind of 4 things within the sort of where do we need to sort of position ourselves and think further. Clearly there is something about how we lead and manage change. So how we as an organisation help our colleagues throughout the whole organisation to understand the changes that are happening and coming, and how we lead those through in a positive way, which enables people to understand their own role within it, but also be supported to actually change the way they may be working or the infrastructure that sits around them. How we communicate effectively is also a key priority for us going forward. So there's feedback which suggests that we're not quite getting it right. We're not giving people opportunities necessary to contribute, or things might be a bit confusing, and we need to get better at that. So we've heard that message and we need to address that. There is a sort of feedback within the survey which alludes to the perception of and the connection between the executive team and the wider organisation. So that's worthy of some further thought and we need to pay attention to that, and we need to work out what it is we actually need to do to address that, whether that's corporately or locally, or both. And I think critically, which probably underpin the other three, there is something for me about building confidence that we will actually take action. So we are perhaps not as good as we should at the whole, you said, we've listened and we've done this. So I think we do the whole, we notice what people have said. We're perhaps not as well, as strong as we might be on how we've listened to those key messages, but crucially how we've translated and linked back the actions that then are forthcoming to the reason why. So that feedback loop, I think we need to pay particular attention to. So at the moment, in terms of the sort of people survey, locally, leaders are now having conversations to really understand what sits behind some of the feedback and scores within their particular business area. And therefore that helps individual local leaders to understand where they need to pay attention. That means there will be different priorities locally in different teams and different directorates. So I know from my own directorate that one team is focusing on one thing whilst another is focusing on another. And there are things that I am focusing on with my senior team. Corporately, going forward, we're going to use the people plan as the vehicle for taking action. As a result of this feedback, rather than creating a separate people survey action plan. We can then use regular pulse surveys in the coming months and years to test our progress and course correct our activity where we need to ensure that we are still addressing the key priorities in the people agenda for the organisation. So that brings me on to the people plan. I'm just 6 months into the role now, so this is sort of my formulation, having listened to and observed and noticed some of the sort of challenges across the whole of the spectrum of the people agenda, and built this framework with advice and feedback from others, and linking it to what we know are important themes from previous people surveys, a framework for our people priorities for CQC for the coming years. And I hope it actually allows us to sort of move towards building our ambition of building a fully inclusive organisation that is truly a great place to work. So that's the intention and the ambition that sits behind the people plan. It's got 6 pillars within it, and they give us those priorities for the next few years. And they also allow us to build the foundations for our transformation agenda. So if I just quickly give you a summary of what sits behind each of them, because some of the words perhaps are a little flat on the page. Leadership and change, probably the most easy to understand. Are we clear about our expectations for our leaders? Are we equipping our leaders to lead in an effective way for this organisation, both now and for the future? And are we building what might be different about leadership in the context of a changing environment into our expectations, and how we build skills and confidence in that space? Line management capability, similarly, are we absolutely clear and critical what it means to be a really good line manager for CQC? And that's different from an organisation which is office-based, because people have to engage and build different kinds of relationships with a dispersed workforce. So are we as an organisation clear about our expectations? Are we clear about the development opportunities that we offer people to allow them to build the skills and capabilities and confidence to be the best possible line managers that they can be? Reward and recognition. We know from the survey that pay is an issue that has popped up. I have a view that actually when pay sort of pops up in a people survey, it's quite often a triangulation of, I have an acceptable workload, I feel valued for what I do, and therefore if those two are out of kilter, it becomes a more acute issue around pay. That said, we do have some things to address around ensuring that we are attractive as an employer, are recognising and rewarding people as well as we can within the constraints of a public sector environment. But we are not just focusing on pay and salaries, but we're thinking about reward and recognition in the widest sense. Employee experience is actually totality of the end-to-end experience and journey for an organisation, right from our attraction strategy and onboarding experiences, which is, I think, probably far superior to very many organisations, the attention we pay to onboarding, through to our policies and HR policies and our approach to talent management and development, right through to offboarding and how people leave this organisation well. So that's sort of whole plethora of activities that sit behind and below that pillar. Employee insight, I think, is a really critical pillar. So this is where we actually look at the insight that we have about our employees and what it's like to be an employee in this organisation. So our colleague, we have data, hard data, in terms of our workforce data, which actually we need to use better. And I've got some work in train on that. But also the insight is also about employee voice. So how are we gathering, seeking out the voice of the employees and building that alongside our data to ensure that we are really thinking about the right things and honing our activity and our interventions in the right way. And that voice comes from all of the feedback, comes from the people survey or pulse survey feedback that we will continue to gather. It also comes from our networks, and we have established mechanisms to actually engage regularly with our network chairs, and the voice that they bring to the table, which is really powerful and important. It comes from our trade unions and being able to engage with the trade unions in a constructive way, which allows that to be a channel by which we can understand the voice that is coming through that trade union membership, and critically also the voice of our staff forum. So we have an established staff forum where we need to also build that voice into the picture. And then the inclusion, which I think speaks for itself and has a sort of, I'll come on to in a little more detail in a moment. So that is about our inclusion agenda, but also our well-being agenda. So allowing people to be of their best in the workplace and be well supported in that way. So underpinning these 6 pillars is our culture and values work, which I've kind of sneaked in as a sort of 7th pillar, but I think it is really a foundation. And there we are currently undertaking a cultural inquiry, which allows us to gather some really rich data about the culture of this organisation right across and right through the organisation, to really understand what that culture looks like and feels like and how our colleagues experience it on a day-to-day basis, because that will give us some data by which we can then think about what is the culture we need, what bits of the culture are really important that we need to preserve and support, and which ones might we need to tweak to make this a really truly great place to work. So that's sort of kind of the activity. We've got an agreed approach to sponsorship for each of these pillars from our senior people leads. So each of the directorates across CQC has a people lead at sort of senior executive level. They will be the sort of joint, sort of an ambassador and champion for each of the pillars separately. And for me, this signals that this is a joint endeavour and a joint accountability and ownership for the people agenda, and that it doesn't sit with my people function, it sits with the senior cadre of the organisation. We are developing the delivery plans to underpin each of the 6 pillars, and including within that some KPIs and key milestones. And we'll use our normal governance route of the Resources Committee and the executive team to report progress regularly. And as I said, we will also use the opportunities of pulse surveys where we can ask a discrete set of questions to check our progress against some of the priorities and interventions and course correct as required. So finally, I'll just say quickly something about the Dni strategy. I'm really excited to be sharing with the board today what has been, I guess, about 8 months worth of work from Safina and Kieran and others in the team, Georgina as well, who have really pulled this together from a standing start. And so it is really exciting that we have got one of our 6 pillars. We've got a very tangible product to be sharing now and launching next week. We've had a full discussion at the board more recently, so I'm not planning to go into all of the detail of the strategy itself, but it does build on the work that we've previously had in Train, and reflects on the really important inputs that we've had through reports from Roger Klein and our workforce data and our interface with the networks. So it's a culmination of a number of things that were already in Train, but bringing them together into one place and actually setting out our stall for the future. So we're launching next week, which is great, and we'll be continuing then to check progress on that and to challenge ourselves against some of the ambitious targets that we've set within it. I shall pause there and ask for any comments or questions or reflections.
Thanks, Peter. I think if I just comment a little bit further in terms before I bring in exec team colleagues just to talk briefly about what they're doing around the people survey. I think it'd be fair to say that there's a mixed picture here in this survey, and I think I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed in the results. I think as Jill mentioned, I think there's some really strong results in there in terms of people's commitment to purpose and those sorts of things. But equally, I think there's some important messages that we need to hear as an organisation, but also as an executive team in particular. I think what we have been very clear on those, we think that we want to be quite structured and quite thoughtful in our approach, making sure we're listening to colleagues and that our responses are about the real things that matter to people, rather than kind of rushing to judgment with a simplistic action plan. Because I think it is, as you dive into this survey, what you will see is differences between different teams, different geographies, and differences between different grades within the organisation as well. So we need to be quite thoughtful about our response. I think the thing that we have done is we've done a lot of fairly strategic change, and you've heard a lot about that earlier on this agenda. But we're also doing a lot of, if you like, low-level tactical changes, adding in additional check steps in processes and that sort of thing in response to daily operational challenges. And I think that's often the thing that people will talk about when they talk about change. When I talk to frontline teams about change, and I say, well, actually, you won't necessarily have seen too much of this. They say, no, we haven't. But actually, let me tell you about the additional check step, or the additional email I've now got to send, or the additional box I've now got to tick. These things add up and irritate people, and that I think is what's behind at least some of the remarks about not managing change well. I think we also need to recognise that this survey was carried out late last year. We were just in the starting phase of withdrawing broadband from a number of colleagues, and as you know, that's been a really difficult issue. I think we as an executive team very much owned that, and we recognised that it was a contentious issue, and we've been very personally associated with that policy change, and that's meant that we've by definition come in for a fair amount of criticism on the back of that. But I am pleased to say that we've had some difficult but very sensible conversations with our trade union colleagues, and I am optimistic that we will bring this to a positive conclusion in the next few days for the benefit of our colleagues, and it will lead to I think a better relationship in the medium to long term with our trades unions. So I think there's some goods come out of that. I think since the survey, a number of very practical things have happened. We were in the early stages of Office 365 rollout. That as Mark was describing, is pretty much there now. We've pursued a pretty aggressive timetable in terms of rolling that out, and we've rolled out the maximum number of features that we can, which again people are starting to see benefits from. We've also signed off the pay rise, so we've delivered the maximum pay rise we can to colleagues, both in terms of pay rise and allowances. I think we've been doing a lot of work on making sure that the communications around transformation are clearer, and that work will be landing very shortly. And again, people I think will be able to see that link between change and the core purpose. I think that important causal link as to why we are worrying about efficiency and transformation and what difference that makes to the people out there that we serve. I think making that link really, really strong is what those communications will do. We also put in a number of really structured engagement activities and listening activities, and colleagues will talk about those in a minute. And we had already had in place at the time of the survey and effectively an exec team on the road program. But again, that's really got into its stride over the last few months, and that we will be continuing to do that. We're also going to make sure that our internal communications activity is a bit more structured, because as Jill said, we haven't been terribly good at the sort of you said we did activity, and we need to just be a bit more structured about that, so it is clear that we are taking the results of the survey very seriously, and that the things we are doing talk directly to the results of the survey. I think sometimes we kind of lose the benefit of some of the things that we do because we haven't necessarily linked them back quite as clearly. So Peter, if I could just briefly hand over to colleagues just to talk about some of the engagement activity that they've been involved in. If I could start with perhaps with Kirsty.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we've got a bit of a mixed picture within our directorate. We've got engagement scores as high as 80% and some which are somewhat lower than that. So I think what we've been doing is we didn't want to make a knee-jerk reaction. We've wanted to spend some time working with the directors, working with their individual teams to really get under the skin of those results, because it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all given the spread of scores that we've got there. What we're looking at is thinking about some things like some real listening events to understand what the issues are, and looking for those common themes at a directorate level that we can take forward as a plan around what we might do. And some of those things we're looking at is how we can support line managers, particularly around delivering difficult messages, and how we can support line managers in supporting people who are managing in a sort of constantly changing environment and giving them the support to do that. So still work in progress. We're coming back next month, having had all the individual conversations at the directorate levels to start to work out exactly what these scores are telling us and what we're going to do in response to that.
So I think two things to sort of really note. One is just to reiterate your point about the decision framework for decisions that we take linked back to our purpose. I think it's a really strong message that we can take forward with all colleagues in the decisions that we take, why we're taking some of the tough decisions that we're taking, but how they link to our purpose about improving services for people that use them. So that work around developing a framework, not just a framework, but the grid around how we share those messages with colleagues and also with managers so they feel equipped to have conversations with colleagues, is an important step for us. We've also been just testing some of the language of the transformation and the future vision to make sure it's meaningful to all people across the organisation, so that all colleagues, inspectors, analysts, people that work in NCSE, people that work in different functions across CQC, understand the change in the context of their work and understand why that change will be beneficial to them and their colleagues. And I think the way we're testing and trialling some of that thinking, both with colleagues from the networks, union colleagues and colleagues from across the organisation, I think will help both people understand the message, but also managers have better conversations with their teams locally. And I know from colleagues in engagement and elsewhere, I think the more opportunities we have for face-to-face conversations where we can listen as well as talk is very important. So we're putting in quite a few listening events across the organisation, similar to Kirsty. More time to talk about the changes, the impact on people, and also the rationale for the decisions that we take. And I think the more we can do that, and the more we have an open conversation about the future, the better.
So I chaired a couple of the regular change calls we have, which we invite all of our leaders to throughout the organisation. I think we had about 300-ish colleagues join the two calls. And as Chris said, really keen to make the call not a broadcast, but a conversation with colleagues who decided to take 45 minutes out of their day to get on the call. We had a reflection about the people survey. A couple of kind of key messages really stood out for me. One was the apparent disconnect between some decisions and values. So I think that goes back to Chris's point, and maybe us being a whole lot more explicit about where the decision making fits in line with the values, and the equal emphasis on all values, on excellence as well as caring, as well as teamwork, etc. And then there was a very strong message for me that I suspect Ted and Rosie will echo as well, which is we have seen some use say we did. So a couple of years ago, we talked about not having the right kit to do our jobs. Well, we've seen a 17% increase in that as a result of the investment on that front. But actually, So far, I think a number of staff would say they haven't seen the significant changes in their workload that they were hoping to see. So a workload that it's a tough job. There's a high volume of stuff that we need to do, and as Ian commented, that is being peppered with changes. So we're trying to be responsive and agile and make changes to the way we do things. But actually, I think our staff are saying we've got some really great kits. Fabulous. We now need to see that kind of step change in terms of making our workload more bearable. But I think it's absolutely critical, Jill's earlier comments, that we don't jump to any assumptions with this, and we take the time within each team, within each region, to really understand what does this mean for our team, because actually there are differences of teams in the same city are reporting quite different results. So we need to make sure that we really tailor what we do to those different areas. So.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, we do need to reflect. Before the survey came out last autumn, we started a series of engagement events across the Directorate, regional events, so that people could get to them. And we were talking about change in the ones in the autumn, and we've got the second of those series of events this week, actually. And we're talking about staff wellbeing. And so I've been meeting a lot of the staff within the Directorate this week and talking to them about their wellbeing and how they can improve their working lives, but also, of course, the results in the staff survey, and trying to reflect and listen to what to hear what's behind that. And I think there's some strong themes coming out, and they've been touched on already. Workload is an important issue, and I think they can see that the IT systems have improved, and everyone recognises that, and I think everyone welcomes it. But I don't think they've seen the effect on their workload as yet. They haven't had that really positive effect that makes their lives a lot easier in terms of workload. And the inspection activity that we're looking at earlier in the performance report, and the report writing issues that we have in terms of the complexities of writing our reports, are both heavy demanders of workload for our staff. And I think they are looking for us to find ways of making that process more efficient and their working lives better, so they can focus on the important issues that they need to focus on, rather than dealing with if you like, the mechanics, the transactions of inspection. Another thing that we've done recently is to survey all our home workers and ask them about their working lives. And of course, most of our staff are home workers in the inspection directorates. And I think there are unique challenges to engaging home workers, and talking to some of them this week, it is very clear that some of them find it very difficult to create boundaries at home between their work and the rest of their lives. And it's very important we give them permission, in fact tell them they have to create those boundaries, so they don't get trapped into ever demanding workload. We work in a system in which you never get to the end of the work. You never get to the point where you say, I've done enough. But you've got to be able to draw a line under it and say, I've done enough today, I'll come back to this tomorrow. And I don't think we give our staff the permission to do that as much as we should. So we need to work with them about how they work better at home. And I think that's something that's been coming out of our engagement events this week. So there's a lot we need to do. We need to reflect on that. I do feel the people plan and the diversity and inclusion strategy are going to be really very powerful in driving this agenda forward. And I totally support what Jill says, is we need to develop our response to the people survey into those projects and not do it as a separate entity. And I very strongly support the idea of regular pulse surveys. We can't afford to wait a year to find out how well we're doing on this.
Okay, so I'd echo a lot of what Ted and Kate have said, and just to pick up one of Jill's points, so I've been here almost a year now, and I think the one thing that struck me throughout the year is we've got fantastic teams who are highly dedicated to what they're doing and the purpose that they're doing it, and I think that's great that that's coming through in the survey, because actually it's something we see on a daily basis with the teams that are working. There's no doubt they are struggling with workload, and certainly my team, that's been a consistent theme, and that's come through very strongly in the staff survey. Our senior management team have been discussing this regularly since the results have been out. We've been out discussing it with teams. I've set up informal engagement events and have had lots and lots of feedback and discussion around the results. As you know, on a personal note, I found them very disappointing. And certainly, I think one of the things that we will be tackling with a very quick action is the workload issues. And my senior management team discussed this at length yesterday, and we have a series of actions we want to put in place to see if we can support inspectors with the heavy workload that they're experiencing at the moment. I agree with Ted. I think the work around around the people plan and the inclusion strategy is excellent, and I think I fully support that. And I also agree that actually some more regular checks so we can see what's happening with our people would be really helpful. So thank you.
So, oh yes, yes.
Sorry.
So in digital, I think the really interesting results that we've got in our people survey. I think there are some aspects of what we see there that we really want to celebrate. The recognition around the hard work that digital colleagues have done over the course of the last year in improving the experience for colleagues across the organisation. Is something I'm really keen that we celebrate that within the directorate, and that improvement is reflected within the directorate itself. In fact, significantly more within the directorate in terms of having their own technology to be able to to support the rest of the organisation. And the other really strong areas that come through are around colleagues feeling that their line manager is incredibly supportive, and that there is strong teamwork within the digital teams. What it leads us to look at in terms of opportunities for improvement, sort of at the headline level, we know that colleagues are very keen to understand, what are the improvements that we're going to bring this year, what are the improvements that are going to alleviate some of the workload around the organisation, and there's more work that we can do in terms of articulating the work, what's next in terms of the delivery for this year. We know that within digital we're acquiring lots of new technology, and some of the things that we've talked about, some of the things that are to come, will have a need for us to invest in the development and training within digital, and that's a real focus for us to connect on. And something that Chris talked about earlier on, we often find in technology that because we sit a little bit back from the front line, there is that less of a connection with the organisational purpose, and the seeing through what we do has a material impact on colleagues' ability to do their work. And I think there's certainly more work that we need to be doing around supporting colleagues, helping make the connection between their work and the outcomes of their work with the purpose of the organisation.
Walter.
So, like Kirsty, I think opened the conversation in strategy intelligence. We've got a lot of variation in the results, a lot of strength, a lot of areas where we've seen a decline in differences between teams on that, and it's powerful to see particularly some of the strong results around how people feel supported by the direct line managers, by their teams, including the openness to new ideas and otherwise, which in some teams is over 80%, which is fantastic. And it's also really positive to see that some of the improvements we've particularly seen in the intelligence team, where previously feedback had been less good, have been relatively sustained, including from new technologies, but not just that. Also, as we've started to change our ways of working, because we've known since last year's pulse check on how we communicate that there's a sort of area of themes, particularly around how we communicate, but also clarity, direction. We actually ran a small survey to complement the staff survey directly, to ask questions around what is it that we within the directorate can do to communicate and help explain what happens alongside the corporate conversations, and we're still analysing the results of that. But the sort of three themes that are already coming out from that. The first one is that we're still struggling to translate well what is happening more broadly across the organisation in terms of what this means for an individual or their team. And when I say translate, that can either be in terms of what this means for me, which is a sort of straightforward one, but the other one is actually how do we explain why a decision is being made and that it is the right decision. It's quite easy to say we have decided, but actually quite often people would like to understand why that is the case, or how the decision has been arrived. and that's obviously something that can only be done through conversation in individual teams with individual managers. Certainly not something that, you know, that the chief executive couldn't do that for every single team. You know, I can't do that for every single team across my directorate. And that brings me to the second theme, that is, you know, the support we can give to managers at all levels to have those conversations, to have the right information to be able to have those conversations, but also from across our teams to demand to have those conversations, because sometimes it's just sort of seen as normalized that it's okay not to have those conversations, and actually I think we want everyone in the organization to demand that those conversations happen as locally as possible. And then the third theme is sort of a slightly more personal reflection around this, is that I think on a number of those issues there's an element of to what extent we generally understand how a change or something has impacted some of our colleagues, and that we give them some empathy and appreciation of that as having happened. It doesn't necessarily mean that they disagree with what happened, but how we understand that. And so a personal example from my team has been that for example, the introduction of Office 365 has actually meant that for some of our colleagues in intelligence, for the analysts, things have become a lot harder than easier, because the way they were able to engage with certain databases, etc., became a lot more complex and complicated. Now, at no point did that mean that they thought Office 365 is the wrong thing to do for the organization, but actually also at no point was I really sufficiently aware and appreciated enough for those colleagues that I created a problem for them, and as a result talked to them about it and appreciated that. So that's the sort of third theme of how we sort of show that empathy and acknowledgement, and then help resolve the issues for it.
So I know it's a hugely old cliche, but you know, our people really are our most important asset, and therefore this is one of the most important conversations we are having. I don't know, Jill, whether you want to come back and add, but I'd quite like to open it up. We've had a lot of, and then come back to you if that's okay. And I think quite a lot of other board members want to speak. So start with Mark, and then John, and then Robert, and then Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, Jill, thanks very much indeed for three very, very good papers. And will you please send my thanks to your team as well, because clearly a lot of work has gone into it. You know, I want to firstly acknowledge the positive feedback in the survey that's been referred to around tech team's purpose, but it's also been very good to hear the exec team acknowledge the challenges that face them and how they are setting about to address those. What I do want to say about the three documents is that they are so closely connected, and I think that's great that the connectivity is built into them so that the survey doesn't stand out there as a standalone item. So I'm really pleased to see that. I think our ambition to be a great place to work is something we should be trumpeting all the time and be challenging ourselves about. It's the standard that we have to accept, and we shouldn't walk past. I like the fact that measurement is clearly put into the diversity inclusion piece, and also the importance of the critical role of line management. And I liked in Kirsty's part of the presentation earlier the success profiles and the emphasis on behaviors. So, you know, all really good stuff. All I would say is that finally that I would really support the demographic and equality group analysis that you intend to do, and I shall certainly make the effort to get to the LGBT plus network meeting when that's presented to us, because I was there the last time it was. Thank you for the invitation to the Diversity Inclusion Strategy Day and launch, and I'm pleased that I'll be able to attend that. But can I just send the message back that's clear in the survey that demonstrate action following the survey, we're at 34%, and know we can do better. And it's great to hear the exec team talking here that sometimes as a very old HR director, I used to get the label a nice to do, but it's very, you know, it's great to hear that this is not a nice to do, it's a business imperative, and that people are really committed to it. So I look forward to following that progress.
Thanks, Mark. John.
Thank you. And I absolutely endorse everything that Mark's just said. And the people plan I thought was excellently thought through, well thought through, and well illustrated. I just want to perhaps address my remarks something different. As non-execs, we have the opportunity to observe at close quarters our executive team colleagues, and I see them all the time exhibit the values of integrity, teamwork, excellence and caring, and as Kate says, it is all four. Indeed, we saw some of that just now. Just in the same way that I see it when I shadow inspections. There is no difference in my mind. And so therefore, I think the disconnects that have been alluded to, maybe differences in tone and style, but particularly what Ian was saying, that of necessity the business has had to do things which don't immediately seem to connect, but nonetheless are stages to reinforce them. And that is an important thing. And maybe a disconnect is also about folk not feeling they can shape that change. And where I would push Jill a little further is when she says we need to help people understand the change, I would go further and say this is about getting people more involved and having ownership. And I perceive an opportunity with the clear narrative that you came up with around smarter teamwork, advanced insight, targeted intervention, in other words, the what, that maybe as you go around the country or as a separate exercise, you could create opportunities for people to use their knowledge and experience as to the how. And I often say to people that broadening that gene pool of ideas actually has a gearing effect on the speed at which you can create the change. And you know, people who are least often asked the question may often have the solution. And maybe we should ask the question.
Good. What did I say? Robert, and then
Thank
Paul,
you.
and then Liz.
Well, I agree vehemently with everything that's been said so far, but I could just start with another positive point, which is the fact of this survey and the fact that it is published in the way that it is in itself something the organisation should take credit for, as being a transparent organisation that asks difficult questions and doesn't shy away from the results of that. And I think that's the first important point I'd like to make. The second is echoing what John has said. What I see of our executive team is not clearly the same as the staff who've answered this survey see. And there is some significance, it seems to me, in the fact that the impression the staff are telling us they have gets more favourable the closer to them the level of leadership they're being asked about. And that is, of course, brings great credit to the line managers, but suggests that our leadership, for whatever reason, and some of them we've been discussed today, isn't thought to be sufficiently visible or is not sufficiently experienced personally by our staff. And that needs two things, and I'm sure both of them happen, but maybe it's a matter of communication, I don't know. One is actually walking the wards, as it were, the floors, and I know that everyone does that, but and I know from personal communications that the staff appreciate that and want more of it, and including from non-executives, in fact. But what the challenge is, having the sort of conversations, and you can do some of that through Teams, but a lot of it is more effective perhaps with personal contact, which show not only that people are there to leaders to communicate things outwards, but as John said, to actually listen to what people are saying and for them to own the changes that are being made, so that there is a feeling of a genuine conversation, even though which may be different from there actually being one, if you see what I mean. There is a conversation, but it's a question of how people go away from that feeling that they've played a part in it. And I think one of the figures that worries me the most in this survey in that regard is the one about staff feeling or not feeling it's safe to challenge the way things are done. And I mean, it's not the lowest of percentages that we're talking about, but it is there. And that speaks to something about freedom to speak up, or a perception of it, without which the conversations that we clearly need aren't going to happen as often. And I suspect that there will be people in this organisation who don't say anything, but answer the survey in an unfavourable way. So, and somehow that atmosphere, if it be one, needs to be changed. It's about turning the commitment that everybody shares to the work, about the value of the work this organisation does, into it being a genuine feeling of a community all working towards the same end. And I understand the difficulties about that, but the more we can feel we're all part of the same community, all doing the same thing, the better I think these figures will come. But I do think, along with John, that the people plan, taken together with this survey, is a very good way of setting about the steps that need to be taken.
Thanks, Robert. Liz.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it was good to hear executive colleagues talk about engagement in terms of understanding why people responded the way they did, what their main concerns are, and also very good to hear about the importance of empathy and understanding that if people are concerned about change, it may be because they're nervous about something or it's having some effect, as Malta said, that maybe people aren't aware of, or and those things seem to me to be really, really important, and any opportunities for demonstrating that empathy and that understanding in the kind of communications going forward, I think, are really important. But also, as I think John was hinting, that it's also really important that people feel that they have a voice and a say and can be part of shaping the change going forward. So almost like the next piece of engagement isn't about what people are feeling, but about the next set of changes that are going to happen and how people can have a say in those. And it seems to me that can happen at more than one level. There's the big changes that are being decided strategically, in which people need to have some voice, some prior knowledge of what's being considered, and some way of having an input. And then there are the changes that people can make within parameters, within their teams. And I think the quality improvement programme is a really important part of that. But we have talked before about how there are periods within organisations when you need quite a lot of sort of senior steering of change, and there are other periods when you need to devolve more of that power and say. And I wonder whether we are at a point where more devolution would actually really help people to feel that that change isn't something that's happening to them, but is something that they can drive. So I'd just like to kind of encourage that thought to be inserted into what I also agree is a very, very good people plan.
Thank you, Peter. A huge amount of really good stuff that's come out, and lots of and I would endorse all the comments which were made previously. One area which I just wanted to kind of draw or ask some questions about was around the cross-cutting one, which isn't one of the pillars, but and within the plan, it talks about culture and values in there, and I was struck by the bullet points around what's going to happen there around cultural inquiry. And then looking at the cultural map and looking to see whether there were proposals for change within that, because it seems to me that the culture is where values and actions, and there's an awful lot of actions in this plan, which is not unusual to get lots of action, where the actions and the values kind of come together, and it's the medium through which where we move the organisation on to where it needs to be will either work or won't work, essentially, within that. And it's something which I think is going to be fundamental to how we move forward. The question was really around when that's happening. I wasn't quite sure about the timetable in here. It looks like we've kind of started it, but I wasn't quite sure whether Q4 April 2020 meant what that meant, and how we see that area kind of developing. I don't know whether that's a question for Jill or for Ian.
Jill?
I can pick that up. So the cultural inquiry, if I just explain a bit about the process and where we've borrowed it from, there's a sort of organisational design and development team that sits within the central government HR function, who have developed a process by which you can actually map culture at a vast level across an organisation. So it is a tool and a technique which allows us to have conversations which are actually, for our purposes, we've shaped. So we've borrowed this, and one of the consultants who's actually been leading on the development and the delivery, and it's been rolled out across a number of central government departments, but also similarly in arm's length bodies as a mechanism for being able to take get a baseline data set of what the culture looks like and how it's described and felt by colleagues across the whole organisation. We started that with our senior leadership team just before Christmas. We're now in the process of rolling out workshops across the whole of the organisation, both at regional levels but also within and through teams, so that we actually can build that sort of sense of what do people experience in their day-to-day work as the culture of the organisation? What are the great bits? What are the bits that sort of perhaps get in the way? So we're rolling that out now. We're doing that alongside so that actually we can maximise the opportunity to a number of people's points, particularly John's and Robert's, around that kind of contribution co-creation piece of workshops which are looking at how we shape and frame the new strategy for the next phase. So we're doing a sort of a double hit with some of those interventions so that we can best use colleagues' time when they come together physically in a place. We're also looking at how we can actually roll that out through teams, and my team, I'm mobilising my people to go out and facilitate these sessions because they've been now trained to do so. So I think that will then give us a really some information about what are the bits of the culture that we absolutely need to keep and cherish, and what are the pieces where we actually might want to think about for the culture that we need for the strategy for the future, are the things we perhaps need to be different in terms of this organisation and the culture that underpins working here, and how then might we think about what that means in terms of slight changes, but also how does it interface with the values and the behavioural indicators that sit underneath the values. Does that help, Paul?
Yes, it does. And I think one of the things that I reflect on, this isn't just a public sector thing. I mean, culture is something which is a lot of private sector organisations are really trying to get a grip on how it affects their business and how you can enable an awful lot of good things to happen if you can do it right. I think I would also observe that where you've got culture, if you've got cultures which you want to cherish, it's very easy to not destroy a culture, and it's very, very difficult to then build it back up again. Equally, I think it can be sometimes quite difficult to change a bad culture as well. So this is a hard piece of work, I think, and has to be really tackled carefully. And so, what timing did you say you were going to come back on it?
So we're rolling out the workshops sort of starting in the coming weeks, and my impatience originally was to have finished by now, and I was reined back by my learned colleagues who said that was ridiculous, and so we're trying to manage in a way which doesn't overwhelm the organisation with. Where we have heard from colleagues that workloads still remains a challenge. So we're a fine line at the moment of balancing to ensure we don't reach saturation point. So I think probably by the sort of later part of the springtime. So, but we'll start to build the emerging picture as we gather the data in. I think by sort of May, June, I should have a better, more consistent picture of what the culture looks like. But you're absolutely right. It is a challenging piece of work, and one where we need to be thoughtful and careful about what we do once we've got the data in. But I think for the first time, having a baseline picture is a really important starting point.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I was reflecting, excuse me, I was reflecting that two other boards that I sit on, so the businesses that I'm involved with, not in healthcare, not regulators, not public sector, but strangely, there's quite an overlap of the sort of results that we're seeing and the results that these other two businesses have seen. And I've been pondering why that might be, and of course it could be a coincidence, but it could be that there's some other changes going on that we may not fully have understood. Things like the blurring, or the technology blurs home life and work life, and some other sort of broader societal changes taking place. So I'm sure you are, Jill, you're probably way ahead of me on this, but it's quite interesting to reflect how much of what we're dealing with is specifically CQC issues, and obviously a lot are, but also how much of broader issues, which we've still got to address because they are the issues. But it was just quite interesting. I don't know whether, Paul, you've seen that in the other businesses you sit on.
Yes, I have, and actually, corporate governance codes are actually driving people to look at corporate culture now as well, which is something new, which is part of the drive behind it. And I think there are also quite a lot of things out there around purpose and what the purpose of organisations is. I think we've got quite a clear purpose, so that's and it's a good story, and that's one of the reasons I think that you get alignment with that purpose when you come through the survey. But it is important to people, I think, and employees, staff, colleagues, all look towards what is it. It's one of the things which they look to.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, the corporate world is slowly coming to grips with the idea that maybe there should be a purpose, whereas we've got very strong embedded purpose, which our people really buy into. Gabby, was there anything you wanted to add? And have to? Okay, that's fine. I mean, my sense is we could talk about this all day because it's really, really important, but I think everybody around the table has spoken. This isn't going to be the last time that we're going to be discussing it. So is there anything anybody wants to add, or are we going to... Oh gosh, here we go. Go around again. Right.
Well,
right. Robert, then Liz.
I mean, simply, no one could be under any illusion that we don't think this is a really important piece of work. There is, in the survey itself, a bit of cynicism about what happens as a result of what we need to say. And I think we need, as a board, if I may say so, to demonstrate that that's not how we see it, and that we are continuing to monitor this on and I would suggest every meeting, something that addresses an aspect of this, but if that's possible.
Yeah, Liz.
Yeah, just a specific point on the inclusion and diversity strategy, which is a really welcome development, and embedded in that is the plan to have some aspirational targets and also dashboards for different parts of the organisation, and I think those sorts of measures will be really important for us, and for us to look at the high level ones as a board as well as them being used within the organisation. And I'm thinking about the fact that, you know, the recent res data across the NHS suggests that there's been some deterioration across the NHS, and I think we really want to be in a position to understand what's happening in our own organisation on race equality, but on other dimensions of equality and diversity as well, and at the experience of how inclusive we are or are not. So just to say, kind of looking forward to the measures as well as the really good planks of that strategy.
So I think to your point, Robert, I mean, I think we will be returning to this, if not at absolutely every board meeting, on a very, very regular basis. It's such an important issue, and we've got to get this right. So I think we will call it an end there. Jill, Savina, thank you very much indeed for all that you've done, and we will be seeing you again shortly. So we've got one more. Thank you. We've got one more item just to finish with, Paul, and that's the ACGC Audit Corporate Governance Committee.
Thank you, Peter. I'll be very brief on this. I think the meeting, which falls during the year between the end of the previous year and the end of the current year that we're in, when the meetings tend to take an awful lot of time around the financial statements, around the annual reports, and around summarising the assurance work for the year. This was midway through the year, and I think was a very useful one in looking particularly at the transformation portfolio and pulling together the work that was done by the subcommittee up until that point, and where we were at. And I think it was a very useful discussion around that. You heard, I think, a lot about that from Kirsty about where the portfolio is, and I think that the ACGC would endorse the scenario that was the scene which was painted by Kirsty in that. And I would say that actually, when we look at the assurance work that's going on, that's supporting the scene as well. And actually, not just in relation to transformation, but in relation to the organisation as a whole, it's producing reports which are they're not outstanding, but they're good, if you see what I mean, in that respect. And I think that's a very solid position we're looking at going forward. So that I think really encapsulates what I'd like to say about from the ACGC meeting.
Great. So, any other business? I have one item. Any other business from anybody else? So my one item, Walter, is to note that this is your final meeting. You're deserting us. Thank you very much for all you've done. I mean, seriously, you've been an absolute star and a great colleague, and I think probably everybody around the table have enjoyed working with you. Really value and appreciate your contribution over the last few years. And just like to really wish you well for the next part of your career. And I'm sure we will see you again somewhere. And you know how to watch future board meetings, so you can still feel that you're involved. Now, unusually, I think for the first time since I've been chairing the board, we have no questions from the public, mainly because the two people who were going to ask questions in the end couldn't be here, so they're deferred until next month. But we do have some visitors from the US, so I'm not going to invite you to speak now, but don't rush off. I'd love to capture your impressions of what this has all been about, but we'll do that in just a second. Meanwhile, just we'll pause the board meeting there. We are actually running a little ahead of ourselves, so we might start the next bit 2 o'clock. Does that sound a quarter of an hour earlier? Does that sound plan? Good. Okay, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.